The morning sun blazed over the dusty Afghan landscape as hospital corpsman second-class Maria Santos checked her medical kit for the third time. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, counting bandages, morphine auto-injectors, and quick-clot packages. The familiar weight of her M4 carbine across her back felt almost foreign compared to the medical supplies that defined her identity. "Doc Santos, you ready?" called out Petty Officer First Class Jake Morrison from across the staging area. His voice carried the easy confidence that came with 5 deployments, but Maria caught the subtle tension underneath. Today's mission was different. Maria nodded, shouldering her pack. At 26, she had earned respect among the Marines she served with, but she still felt the weight of being one of the few women in forward combat roles. The nickname Doc came with responsibility that went far beyond her rank. When bullets started flying, she would be the difference between life and death for every Marine in her unit. The briefing had been straightforward enough. Intelligence suggested a high-value target was hiding in a compound approximately 12 clicks northeast of their forward operating base. The mission called for a quick strike, capture or eliminate the target, and immediate extraction. What the intelligence officers hadn't mentioned was the growing Taliban presence in the surrounding villages or the recent uptick in improvised explosive devices along the main supply routes. Commander Jack Richardson stood before the assembled team, his weathered face serious as he outlined the operation. Maria had worked with SEAL teams before, but Richardson was legendary even among Special Operations Forces. His reputation for bringing everyone home alive was matched only by his tactical brilliance under pressure. "Listen up," Richardson's voice cut through the morning air. "We go in fast, we get what we came for, and we get out. Doc Santos will be with Team 2, providing medical support as needed. Standard rules of engagement apply." Maria felt the familiar pre-mission butterflies in her stomach. She had been in combat situations before, but something about this morning felt different. Maybe it was the way the local interpreters had been unusually quiet during the briefing, or perhaps it was the intelligence reports that seemed too clean, too simple. The helicopter ride to the landing zone passed in relative silence. Maria found herself studying the faces of the SEALs around her. These were professionals who had seen action in multiple theaters, men who could fight their way out of almost any situation. Yet she noticed the same tension she felt reflected in their careful equipment checks and quiet conversations. The compound sat on a small hill overlooking a valley dotted with agricultural fields and irrigation canals. From the air, it looked unremarkable: mud brick walls, a central courtyard, and several outbuildings that could hide anything from weapons caches to enemy fighters. The intelligence photos showed only 3 or 4 potential hostiles, but Maria had learned to prepare for the unexpected. As the helicopters touched down in a swirl of dust and rotor wash, Maria felt her training take over. Her medical instincts sharpened, cataloging potential injury scenarios and calculating response times. The weight of her medical kit suddenly felt reassuring rather than burdensome. The team moved across the rocky terrain with practiced silence. Maria stayed close to Team 2's leader, Petty Officer Collins, a soft-spoken veteran whose calm demeanor masked lightning-fast reflexes. The plan called for simultaneous breaches of the compound from 3 directions, with Maria positioned to respond to casualties from any team. Everything went wrong in the first 30 seconds. The compound wasn't hiding 3 or 4 enemy fighters. As the teams approached their breach points, automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions. The intelligence had been either outdated or deliberately misleading. Instead of a simple capture operation, the SEALs found themselves facing a well-prepared enemy force with overlapping fields of fire and prepared positions. "Contact left! Contact left!" The radio crackled with urgent voices as Team 1 found themselves pinned down by heavy machine gun fire from the compound's eastern wall. Maria could hear the distinctive crack of AK-47s mixed with the heavier thump of a crew-served weapon. Team 2's breach point suddenly became untenable as enemy fighters appeared on the compound's roof, pouring fire down on their position. Collins made the tactical decision to fall back to cover behind a low stone wall, but Maria could see they were in trouble. Without suppressive fire, Team 1 would remain pinned down, and the enemy fighters had clear lines of sight on all the helicopter landing zones. "Doc, stay low," Collins shouted over the gunfire. "We need to establish fire superiority before we can advance." Maria pressed herself against the stone wall, feeling chips of rock spray across her back as enemy rounds struck nearby. Her medical training had prepared her for treating combat wounds, but nothing had quite prepared her for the chaos of a prolonged firefight. The sound was overwhelming, not just the gunfire, but the shouted commands, the whine of ricochets, and the distant sound of helicopter rotors as their extraction bird moved to a safer orbit. Through the noise and confusion, Maria heard something that made her blood run cold. From a direction of Team 1's position came a voice she recognized. "Corpsman! Corpsman up! Someone was hit." Maria's training kicked in immediately, overriding the fear and adrenaline that threatened to paralyze her. She had to reach the wounded Marine, but 50 meters of open ground lay between her current position and Team 1. Enemy fire was still concentrated on that area, and moving across that space would be suicide without covering fire. "Collins, I need to get to Team 1, she called out, checking her medical kit one more time. Collins looked at her with the expression of a man calculating impossible odds. "Doc, that's a death run. We need to suppress those positions first." But Maria could hear the urgency in the distant calls for medical assistance. Every second of delay could mean the difference between saving a life and losing a teammate. She understood the tactical situation, but her medical oath demanded action. Commander Richardson's voice suddenly cut through the radio chatter. "All teams, this is 6. Enemy force is larger than anticipated. We're looking at approximately 15 to 20 fighters with at least 2 crew-served weapons. Adjust your positions accordingly." Maria realized that the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. The enemy had the high ground, superior numbers, and prepared positions. The SEAL teams were extremely capable, but they were facing odds that would challenge even their considerable skills. "Doc, can you make it to that irrigation ditch?" Collins pointed to a concrete channel about 20 meters to their right. "If you can reach that, you might be able to work your way around to Team 1's flank." Maria studied the terrain. The ditch would provide concealment, but limited cover. Enemy fighters on the compound roof would still have angles of fire on her position, but it was better than trying to cross open ground under direct fire. "I can make it," she said, though her mouth felt dry as dust. "Wait for my mark," Collins replied, signaling to his teammates. "We'll give you covering fire, but you'll need to move fast." Maria took several deep breaths, running through her mental checklist. Medical kit secure, rifle ready, route planned. The calls for medical assistance continued from Team 1's position, adding urgency to an already desperate situation. 3, 2, 1 move. Collins and his team opened fire on the enemy positions, their automatic weapons laying down a wall of suppressive fire that forced the enemy fighters to take cover. Maria sprinted from behind the stone wall, her boots pounding against the hard-packed earth as she ran toward the irrigation ditch. Time seemed to slow as she crossed the open space. She could hear bullets snapping through the air around her, some close enough that she felt the pressure waves. Her medical pack bounced against her back with each step, and she found herself counting her strides. 10 meters, 15, almost there. She dove into the concrete irrigation channel just as enemy fire shifted to her position. Chunks of concrete exploded above her head as she pressed herself against the bottom of the ditch. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she was alive and uninjured. The ditch stretched toward Team 1's position, but Maria quickly realized that reaching them would require exposing herself to enemy fire at several points. The concrete channel had been built for irrigation, not military cover, and enemy fighters on the compound roof could see into sections of it. As she began working her way along the ditch, Maria heard Commander Richardson's voice on the radio again. This time, his tone carried an edge she hadn't heard before. "All teams, be advised. Enemy force has anti-aircraft capability. Our extraction bird just took small arms fire and is moving to extended orbit. We may be looking at extended ground time. The words hit Maria like a physical blow. Extended ground time meant they would have to hold their positions against a superior enemy force until another extraction could be arranged. It also meant that any casualties would have to be stabilized for a much longer period than originally planned. She pressed forward through the irrigation ditch, trying to balance speed with stealth. Behind her, she could hear Colin's team maintaining sporadic fire on the enemy positions, but their ammunition wouldn't last forever. Ahead, the calls for medical assistance had become more urgent. When Maria finally reached a position where she could see Team 1, her heart sank. Petty Officer First Class David Kim was down, blood spreading across his left shoulder and upper chest. The team leader, Chief Petty Officer Torres, was applying pressure to the wound, but Maria could see from the blood loss that Kim needed immediate medical attention. The problem was reaching him. Team 1 had taken cover behind a low berm approximately 30 meters from the compound wall. Enemy fighters on the roof had clear lines of sight on their position, and any movement drew immediate fire. Maria was still in the irrigation ditch, but the channel ended about 10 meters short of Team 1's position. Chief Torres, she called out during a brief lull in the gunfire. How bad is Kim? Took one through the shoulder, document bleeding pretty heavy, but he's conscious. Maria could see the tactical problem clearly. Kim needed medical attention that Torres couldn't provide with basic first aid, but reaching him would require crossing 10 meters of ground under enemy observation. Even if she made it to their position, treating Kim properly would require time and attention that would leave her vulnerable to enemy fire. She was still calculating her options when the situation changed dramatically. A new sound joined the chaos of the firefight, the distinctive whistle of incoming mortars. The enemy fighters had called for indirect fire support, and the first round impacted about 50 meters from Maria's position. The explosion threw dirt and debris into the air, and she realized that their tactical situation had just become critical. Incoming mortars. The warning came across the radio from multiple sources as the second round impacted even closer to Team 1's position. Maria made her decision. Kim was wounded and bleeding, possibly severely. The mortar fire was getting closer, which meant their current positions were becoming untenable. If the teams had to move, Kim would need immediate medical stabilization to survive a tactical withdrawal under fire. She keyed her radio. Chief Torres, I'm coming to you. Have Kim ready for immediate treatment. Doc, negative. Too much fire. But Maria was already moving. She climbed out of the irrigation ditch and began a low crawl toward Team 1's position, using every bit of available cover. Her medical training had taught her that golden hour protocols could mean the difference between life and death, and Kim was rapidly approaching the point where basic first aid wouldn't be sufficient. The crawl across those final 10 meters felt like an eternity. Enemy fire cracked overhead, and Maria could feel the impact vibrations of mortar rounds through the ground. Her medical kit dragged behind her, but she kept moving forward, focused entirely on reaching the wounded SEAL. When she finally reached Team 1's position, Maria immediately began assessing Kim's wounds. The bullet had entered through his left shoulder and exited near his collarbone, missing major arteries but causing significant tissue damage and blood loss. He was conscious but showing early signs of shock. Kim, can you hear me? She asked while opening her medical kit. Yeah, document hurts like hell, but I can hear you. Maria began working with practiced efficiency, establishing in 4-line and administering fluids to combat shock while applying proper pressure dressings to both the entry and exit wounds. The bleeding was controlled, but Kim would need surgical intervention within the next few hours. As she worked, another mortar round impacted nearby, close enough that the explosion left her ears ringing. Chief Torres was coordinating return fire with his remaining team members, but Maria could see that their ammunition was running low. Chief, what's our status? She asked while checking Kim's vital signs. Not good. Document. We're low on ammo, the mortars are getting closer, and extraction is at least 30 minutes out. Maria realized that their situation was becoming desperate. Kim was stabilized for the moment, but he needed evacuation to a surgical facility. The other teams were facing similar pressure, and their ability to maintain their positions was diminishing as ammunition ran low and enemy mortar fire became more accurate. It was then that she heard Commander Richardson's voice on the radio, calm but urgent. "Doc Santos, what's Kim's status?" "Stabilized for transport, but he needs surgery within a few hours." "Copy. All teams, we're going to have to fight our way to the alternate extraction point." "Doc, can Kim move?" Maria looked at Kim, who despite his pain was trying to sit up. "I can move, Doc. Just help me up." She knew that moving Kim was risky, but staying in their current position with accurate mortar fire incoming was even more dangerous. The alternate extraction point was approximately 800 meters south of their current position, across terrain that offered limited cover. As she helped Kim to his feet, Maria heard Commander Richardson's voice again. This time, there was something different in his tone that made her look up from her patient. "Doc Santos, I need you to take point with Team 2 on the withdrawal. Chief Torres will bring Kim." Maria stared at him in confusion. "Sir, I'm a medic." Richardson's eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her heart skip. "Doc, you've proven you can move under fire better than anyone here today. We need someone who can navigate that terrain and spot threats while the teams provide covering fire." The weight of what he was asking hit her immediately. Taking point meant being the first person to move across dangerous ground, identifying enemy positions, and safe routes while under fire. It was typically a job for the most experienced infantry soldiers, not Navy hospital corpsmen. "Sir, I don't know if—" "Doc," Richardson interrupted, his voice carrying absolute confidence. "You made it through that kill zone to reach Kim when nobody else could. You've got the skills for this." Maria felt the eyes of every SEAL on her. These were men who had been fighting in special operations for years, and they were looking to her to lead them out of an impossible situation. The responsibility was overwhelming, but she also realized that Richardson was right. She had successfully navigated the most dangerous terrain of the day, and she understood the tactical situation as well as anyone. "What's the route, sir?" she heard herself asking. Richardson pointed toward a series of ridgelines and agricultural terraces that stretched toward the alternate extraction point. "We'll move in bounds, using those terraces for cover. You and Team 2 take the first bound, establish overwatch, then cover the rest of us as we move." Maria nodded, though her mouth felt like sand. She had trained for combat situations, but nothing had prepared her for being the tactical leader in a fighting withdrawal. Still, Kim needed evacuation, and the entire team was depending on her to get them to safety. As she prepared to move out, checking her rifle and adjusting her medical pack, Maria realized that everything she had believed about her role was changing. She wasn't just a medic anymore. She was a combat leader, and the lives of some of America's most elite warriors depended on her tactical decisions. The mortar fire was getting closer, and time was running out. Maria took a deep breath, said a quick prayer, and prepared to lead her first tactical movement under fire. Everything that happened next would test not just her medical skills, but her courage, tactical judgment, and ability to think clearly under the most extreme pressure imaginable. The young hospital corpsman who had checked her medical kit that morning was about to discover capabilities she never knew she possessed. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she checked her rifle one final time. The weight of Commander Richardson's decision pressed down on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Around her, the most elite soldiers in the American military were preparing to follow her lead across 800 meters of hostile terrain. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same people who had spent months calling her just a medic were now depending on her tactical judgment to get them home alive. "Doc, you ready for this?" Collins asked quietly, his voice carrying none of the doubt she expected. Instead, she heard the kind of professional respect that came from watching someone perform under fire. "As ready as I'll ever be," Maria replied, though her voice sounded steadier than she felt. The first bound would take them across a series of agricultural terraces carved into the hillside. The ancient irrigation system created a natural maze of stone walls and earthen berms that could provide cover, but it also created perfect hiding spots for enemy fighters. Maria had to choose a route that balanced concealment with speed, all while staying oriented toward the extraction point. Kim was on his feet beside Chief Torres, his left arm secured against his body with improvised slings made from medical tape and bandages. The bleeding had stopped, but Maria could see the pain etched in his face. Moving him across rough terrain would be challenging under the best circumstances. Doing it while under fire would test everyone's limits. Movement in 3 minutes, Commander Richardson announced over the radio. All teams acknowledge. One by one, the team leaders confirmed their readiness. Maria realized she was holding her breath and forced herself to exhale slowly. Her medical training had taught her breathing techniques for managing stress, but nothing had prepared her for the responsibility of leading a tactical withdrawal. The mortar fire had temporarily stopped, which could mean the enemy was repositioning their indirect fire assets or preparing for a ground assault. Either possibility made their current position untenable. They had to move, and they had to move now. Maria studied the terrain ahead through a rifle scope. The first terrace wall was approximately 50 meters away, with limited cover between their current position and that objective. Beyond that, the agricultural terraces created a series of potential cover positions, but each movement would expose them to observation from the compound and surrounding high ground. Team 2, on me, she called softly. Collins and his 2 remaining team members, Petty Officer Rodriguez and Seaman Patterson, gathered around her position. Here's what we're going to do, Maria said, surprised by the authority in her own voice. We move fast to that first terrace wall, then we bound from cover to cover using the irrigation channels. Rodriguez, you watch our 6. Patterson, keep eyes on the compound. Collins, you help me navigate. The SEALs nodded, their expressions serious but confident. Maria realized they weren't questioning her leadership. They were treating her like any other tactical leader they had worked with. The responsibility was terrifying and empowering at the same time. Team 2, move out. Maria sprinted toward the first terrace wall, her medical pack bouncing against her back with each step. Behind her, she could hear the steady footfalls of the 3 SEALs following her lead. The 50 meters felt like 500, but no enemy fire materialized during their movement. They reached the stone wall, breathing hard but uninjured. Maria immediately began scanning the terrain ahead, while Collins checked their position on his GPS unit. The next bound would take them across an open area approximately 30 meters wide, with an irrigation ditch on the far side that could provide concealment for the following teams. Looks clear, Rodriguez reported from his position watching their rear. No movement from the compound. Maria keyed her radio. Team 1, Team 2 is in position. You're cleared for movement to our location. Chief Torres acknowledged and began moving with Kim and the remaining Team 1 members. Maria watched their approach while simultaneously studying the route ahead. The tactical multitasking was challenging, but she found herself adapting to the mental demands of combat leadership. Team 1 reached their position without incident, though Maria could see that Kim was struggling with the movement. His face was pale, and he was breathing harder than the tactical situation warranted. She made a quick medical assessment and determined that while he was stable, they needed to reach the extraction point quickly. Kim, how are you holding up? She asked while helping him drink water from her hydration system. I'm good, document. Just keep us moving. Commander Richardson's voice crackled over the radio. All teams, enemy foot patrol spotted moving toward your last known position. Approximately 6 fighters with light weapons. You need to pick up the pace. Maria felt her heart rate spike. Enemy fighters on foot could track their movement and call an accurate indirect fire on their position. They had to move faster, but speed would increase the risk of making noise or choosing poor cover positions. Team 2, we're going to start bounding by pairs, she decided. Collins, you're with me. Rodriguez and Patterson, you provide overwatch and follow in 60 seconds. Collins nodded, checking his rifle. What's the route, Doc? Maria pointed toward the irrigation ditch. We follow that channel for about 200 meters, then we have to cross another open area to reach the ridgeline. The ridgeline should give us good cover for the final approach to the extraction point. As they prepared to move, Maria heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors in the distance. Their extraction bird was getting closer, but they still had several hundred meters of dangerous ground to cover. "On me," Maria said, and began moving toward the irrigation ditch. The concrete channel was deeper than it had appeared from their previous position, providing excellent concealment, but making movement slower. Maria had to balance speed with stealth, knowing that enemy fighters could be anywhere in the surrounding terrain. As they worked their way along the ditch, Maria found herself thinking tactically in ways that surprised her. She automatically cataloged potential firing positions, escape routes, and choke points. Her medical training had taught her to assess and respond to immediate threats, and those same skills were translating to tactical decision-making under fire. "Doc, movement to our right," Collins whispered urgently. Maria froze, scanning the terrain in the direction Collins had indicated. Two figures in local clothing were moving along a dirt path approximately 100 meters away. They could be civilians, enemy fighters, or spotters calling in their position. "Do we engage?" Collins asked quietly. The question hit Maria like a physical blow. As a medic, her instinct was to avoid harming anyone who wasn't an immediate threat. But as a tactical leader, she had to consider the safety of her entire team. If those figures were enemy spotters, failing to engage could result in accurate mortar fire on their position. Negative, she decided after a long moment. We can't confirm hostile intent, and engaging might give away our position to other enemy forces. Collins nodded, though she could see the tension in his face. Combat decision-making often required choosing between multiple bad options, and Maria was learning that lesson in real time. They continued moving along the irrigation ditch until they reached the point where they would have to cross open ground to reach the ridgeline. The terrain between their position and the ridge was approximately 50 meters of cultivated fields with minimal cover. Enemy observers from multiple directions could potentially spot their movement. Maria keyed her radio. "All teams, Team 2 is preparing to cross to the ridgeline. Request covering fire on the compound if we take contact." "Copy, Team 2, Richardson replied. "All teams are in position to provide support." Maria took a deep breath and studied the ground ahead. The field had been recently plowed, which would make movement more difficult but might also provide some concealment in the furrows between planted rows. She decided to move parallel to the furrows, using them for what limited cover they offered. "Collins, we go on 3. Stay low and keep the furrows between us and the compound." "Roger, document." 3, 2, 1, move. They broke from the concealment of the irrigation ditch and began crossing the open field. Maria's boots sank into the soft earth with each step, making movement slower than she had anticipated. Halfway across the field, she heard the crack of a rifle shot and felt the distinctive snap of a bullet passing close to her head. "Contact!" Collins shouted, returning fire toward the compound. Maria dove into the nearest furrow, her heart hammering against her ribs. The enemy had spotted their movement and were engaging with accurate rifle fire. More shots cracked overhead as she pressed herself into the soft earth. "Team 2 taking fire," she reported over the radio while trying to spot the enemy firing position. Immediately, the other teams began laying down suppressive fire on the compound and surrounding buildings. The volume of return fire was impressive, but Maria realized they were still pinned down in an exposed position. "Collins, can you see the shooter?" she called out. "Negative. Fire's coming from the compound roof, but I can't get a clear angle from here." Maria realized they had two options: stay pinned down in the field until they ran out of ammunition, or continue moving under fire to reach the cover of the ridgeline. Neither option was appealing, but staying in place would eventually result in accurate mortar fire on their position. "We have to keep moving," she decided. "On my mark, we bound to that rock outcropping." Collins looked at the position she had indicated, a small pile of stones approximately 20 meters closer to the ridgeline. It would provide better cover than their current position, but reaching it would require exposing themselves to enemy fire. "Ready when you are, document." Maria counted down from 3 and then sprinted toward the rock outcropping. Enemy fire immediately intensified, with multiple shooters engaging their position. She heard Collins returning fire as he moved parallel to her route, and the distinctive sound of friendly suppressive fire coming from the other team's positions. They reached the rocks breathing hard but uninjured. From their new position, Maria could see the ridgeline clearly. One more bound would put them in covered terrain where they could provide overwatch for the other team's movement. "Almost there," she told Collins while scanning for the next covered position. But as she prepared for the final movement to the ridgeline, Maria heard something that made her blood run cold. Over the sound of gunfire and radio chatter came the distinctive whistle of incoming artillery. The enemy had called in heavier indirect fire support, and the first round impacted approximately 100 meters from their position. The explosion was much larger than the previous mortar rounds, throwing dirt and debris high into the air. Maria realized they were now facing artillery fire, which meant the enemy had access to much more accurate and lethal indirect fire capabilities. "All teams, incoming artillery," she reported over the radio. "We need to reach covered positions immediately." Commander Richardson's voice came back immediately. "All teams, accelerate movement to the ridgeline. Doc, get your people to cover and establish overwatch." Maria made the decision without hesitation. "Collins, we're going for the ridgeline right now. Don't stop. Don't take cover, just run." They broke from behind the rock outcropping and sprinted toward the ridgeline as fast as the terrain would allow. Behind them, Maria could hear the whistle of another incoming artillery round, this one closer than the first. She pushed her legs harder, feeling her medical pack bouncing wildly against her back. The ridgeline was closer than it appeared. Within 30 seconds, they had reached the cover of a rocky outcropping that would protect them from both direct fire and artillery fragments. Maria immediately began scanning the terrain below, looking for the best routes for the other teams to follow. From her new position, she could see the entire tactical situation clearly. Teams 1 and 3 were still in exposed positions, with enemy artillery rounds impacting closer to their locations. The extraction point was visible approximately 400 meters to the south, but the terrain between their current positions and the landing zone was completely open. "Team 2 in position," she reported over the radio. "I can see clear routes to the extraction point, but we need to move fast. Artillery fire is getting more accurate." As if to emphasize her point, another artillery round impacted near Team 3's position. Through her rifle scope, Maria could see the SEALs pressed against whatever cover they could find, but their position was becoming untenable. Commander Richardson's voice cut through the radio chatter with absolute authority. "All teams, fighting withdrawal to the extraction point. Team 2 will provide overwatch and direction. Doc, talk us through the route." Maria felt the full weight of leadership settle on her shoulders. She was now responsible for directing the tactical movement of multiple special operations teams across hostile terrain while under artillery fire. The young hospital corpsman who had started the day checking medical supplies was now serving as the tactical coordinator for one of the most dangerous military operations she could imagine. She keyed her radio and began calling out directions, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Team 1, move south along that stone wall to your left. When you reach the end of the wall, there's a drainage ditch that will give you concealment for the next 200 meters." Chief Torres acknowledged and began moving with Kim and his remaining team members. Maria watched their progress through her scope while simultaneously tracking the movement of Team 3 and monitoring for enemy activity. The artillery fire continued, but the enemy gunners seemed to be having difficulty tracking the team's movement. Each round impacted several seconds after the SEALs had moved from their previous positions, suggesting that the enemy was working with outdated position reports. Team 3, when Team 1 clears that ditch, you move to the ridgeline using the same route Team 2 used. "We'll provide covering fire if you take contact." Commander Richardson acknowledged, and Maria watched as he led his team across the open ground toward her position. Enemy small arms fire erupted from multiple positions, but The suppressive fire from Teams 1 and 2 kept the enemy shooters from establishing accurate fire. Within minutes, all three teams had reached the ridgeline and were preparing for the final movement to the extraction point. Kim was still mobile, though Maria could see he was struggling with fatigue and pain. The bleeding had remained controlled, but he needed medical attention beyond what field care could provide. "Doc, what's Kim's status?" Commander Richardson asked as Team 3 reached the ridgeline. "He's stable, but deteriorating. We need to get him on that bird in the next 15 minutes. Richardson nodded, studying the terrain between their position and the extraction point. The landing zone was in a small valley, surrounded by low hills that could hide enemy observers. Reaching it would require crossing completely open ground for the final 200 meters. "All teams, the extraction bird is 2 minutes out," Richardson announced. "We're going to bound by teams to the landing zone. Doc, I want you to take point with Team 2 and secure the landing zone." Maria felt her stomach clench. Securing the landing zone meant being the first to reach the extraction point and ensuring it was safe for the helicopter to land. If enemy fighters were waiting in ambush, she would be the first to encounter them. "Roger, sir," she replied, though her mouth felt dry. As she prepared for what she hoped would be their final tactical movement, Maria realized that the day had fundamentally changed her understanding of her own capabilities. She had led tactical movements under fire, made life-or-death decisions for highly trained special operations soldiers, and earned the respect of men who had been fighting wars before she graduated from high school. But the most challenging part of the day was still ahead. The extraction was the most dangerous phase of any operation, when wounded personnel and mission fatigue made everyone vulnerable to mistakes. As she checked her rifle and prepared to lead Team 2 toward the landing zone, Maria knew that the next few minutes would determine whether everyone made it home alive. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder, and Maria could see the extraction bird approaching from the south. Everything now depended on her ability to get the teams safely across those final 200 meters of open ground and establish security for the helicopter's landing. She had come a long way from being just a medic. The sound of the approaching helicopter filled Maria with both relief and dread. Relief because extraction was finally within reach, but dread because she knew the next few minutes would be the most dangerous of the entire operation. Landing zones were natural kill zones where enemy forces could concentrate fire on a predictable target. As the team leader responsible for securing the zone, Maria would be walking directly into the most likely spot for an enemy ambush. "Team 2, final equipment check," she called out, though her own hands were already moving through the familiar routine. Rifle secure, medical pack properly positioned, radio functioning. The weight of her M4 carbine had become comforting rather than burdensome over the course of the day. Collins moved up beside her, his expression serious but confident. "Doc, you've gotten us this far. We trust you to get us home." The simple statement carried more weight than any medal or commendation Maria had ever received. These were men who had served in the most elite units of the American military, and they were placing their lives in her hands based on her performance under fire. "Thanks, Collins," she replied, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. "Let's bring everyone home." Commander Richardson's voice crackled over the radio. "Extraction bird is 30 seconds out. Doc, take Team 2 and secure the landing zone. Teams 1 and 3 will follow in bounds once you give the all-clear." Maria took one last look at Kim, who was leaning against Chief Torres, but still conscious and alert. The improvised bandages were holding, and his color looked better than it had an hour ago, but she knew he was running on adrenaline and determination. Once they reached the helicopter, she would need to reestablish his foreline and monitor for shock during the flight back to the forward operating base. "Team 2, on me," she said, and began moving down the ridgeline toward the landing zone. The terrain was treacherous, loose rock, and steep inclines that required careful foot placement to avoid twisted ankles or noisy movement. Maria found herself thinking like an infantry soldier, automatically choosing routes that provided the best combination of speed and concealment. Her medical training had taught her to move efficiently in emergency situations, and those same principles applied to tactical movement. As they approached the valley floor, Maria could see the landing zone clearly. It was a roughly circular area of flat ground approximately 50 meters in diameter, surrounded by low hills that could hide enemy observers. The helicopter would need to land in the center of the zone, which meant the teams would have to provide security in all directions simultaneously. Collins, when we reach the LZ, I want you and Rodriguez to secure the north side. Patterson, you take the east. I'll cover south and west until the other teams arrive. Roger, Doc, Collins replied. What's the protocol if we take contact during the extraction? Maria had been thinking about exactly that scenario. If enemy fighters opened fire during the helicopter landing, the teams would be caught between defending the aircraft and getting wounded personnel loaded quickly. The pilot would need clear fields of fire to take off safely, but the teams couldn't abandon security until everyone was aboard. If we take contact, we establish a perimeter and suppress enemy fire until the bird can lift off, she decided. Priority loading for wounded first, then we extract by teams based on ammunition status. The plan sounded professional and logical, but Maria knew that combat rarely went according to plan. Still, having a framework for decision-making would help everyone react quickly if the situation deteriorated. They reached the edge of the landing zone without incident. The valley floor was eerily quiet after the constant gunfire and explosions of the past several hours. Maria could hear the helicopter approaching, its rotor noise echoing off the surrounding hills. Team 2 in position, she reported over the radio. Landing zone appears secure, but limited visibility on the eastern approach. Copy, Team 2, Richardson replied. Teams 1 and 3 are moving to your position. Maria positioned herself where she could observe the southern and western approaches to the landing zone, while keeping an eye on Kim's condition as Team 1 descended toward their position. Through her rifle scope, she scanned the surrounding terrain for any sign of enemy movement. The helicopter came into view over the southern ridgeline, a UH-60 Black Hawk flying fast and low to minimize exposure to enemy fire. The pilot executed a tactical approach, using terrain features to mask his movement until the final approach to the landing zone. As the aircraft settled into its landing flare, Maria felt the familiar wash of rotor downblast and debris. The noise was overwhelming, making radio communication difficult and masking the sound of potential enemy movement. This was always the most vulnerable moment of any extraction. Team 1, move to the bird, she shouted over the rotor noise. Chief Torres began moving toward the helicopter with Kim and the remaining Team 1 members. Maria watched their movement while continuing to scan for threats, her finger resting lightly on her rifle's safety selector. That was when she saw them. Movement on the eastern ridgeline, approximately 300 meters from the landing zone. Multiple figures in earth-tone clothing, moving with the kind of purpose that suggested military training. Maria raised her rifle and looked through the scope, trying to get a clear identification. Contact east, she called out over the radio. Multiple personnel on the eastern ridge. The figures were definitely armed, and they were moving into positions that would give them clear fields of fire on the landing zone. Maria realized they had walked into exactly the kind of ambush she had been worried about. The enemy had anticipated their extraction point and positioned fighters to engage during the most vulnerable phase of the operation. Commander Richardson's voice cut through the rotor noise. Doc, can you confirm hostile intent? Maria watched the figures through her scope. They were carrying weapons and moving tactically, but they hadn't opened fire yet. International law required positive identification before engaging, but waiting for the enemy to shoot first could result in catastrophic casualties during the extraction. Before she could answer, the decision was made for her. Muzzle flashes erupted from the eastern ridgeline as enemy fighters opened fire on the landing zone. Maria heard the distinctive crack of bullets passing overhead, and she could see the helicopter crew chief returning fire with the aircraft's door gun. All teams were taking effective fire from the east, she reported while acquiring targets through her rifle scope. Engaging enemy positions. The landing zone erupted into chaos. Enemy fire was coming from at least 6 different positions on the eastern ridge, with some rounds impacting dangerously close to the helicopter. The pilot was maintaining his position, but Maria could see him making calculations about how long he could stay on the ground under fire. Collins and his team were returning fire, but they were at extreme range for their weapons. The enemy fighters had chosen their positions well, engaging from a distance that made accurate return fire difficult while giving them clear shots at the stationary helicopter. Team 1, get Kim on the bird now, Maria shouted while engaging an enemy firing position with her M4. Chief Torres was dragging Kim toward the helicopter, but Maria could see they were moving too slowly. Kim was struggling to maintain his footing, and Torres couldn't provide covering fire while supporting the wounded SEAL. Maria made a split-second decision that went against every instinct of her medical training. She stopped treating Kim as a patient who needed protection and started treating him as a fellow warrior who could still contribute to the fight. "Kim," she shouted, moving toward his position. "Can you shoot?" Kim looked at her with pain-filled but determined eyes. "Give me a target document." Maria helped him into a supported firing position behind a small boulder, where he could engage enemy targets while remaining partially protected. His left arm was useless, but he could still operate his rifle with his right hand if someone helped stabilize the weapon. 3 o'clock, enemy fighter in the rocks, she called out while helping Kim acquire the target. Kim's rifle cracked once, and Maria saw one of the enemy muzzle flashes cease immediately. Despite his wounds, the Navy SEAL was still an expert marksman. "Good hit," she told him while scanning for new targets. "Stay here and keep shooting. I need to coordinate the extraction." As she moved away from Kim's position, Maria realized that the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Enemy fire was intensifying, and she could see additional muzzle flashes from the northern ridgeline. The enemy had positioned fighters in multiple locations, creating overlapping fields of fire on the landing zone. Commander Richardson appeared beside her, having moved down from the ridgeline with Team 3. His presence was immediately reassuring, but Maria could see the concern in his expression. "Doc, we need to suppress those positions or the bird can't stay," he said while returning fire toward the eastern ridge. Maria looked at the helicopter, where the crew chief was laying down heavy, suppressive fire with the door gun. The pilot was maintaining his position, but she could see him looking anxiously at his instruments. Fuel consumption increased dramatically during hover operations, and enemy fire could damage critical systems at any moment. "Sir, I have an idea," she said, a plan forming in her mind. "What if we use the helicopter's firepower to suppress the eastern ridge while we bound toward those positions? If we can get close enough, we can use grenades to neutralize the enemy firing positions." Richardson stared at her for a moment. "Doc, that would put you in direct contact with a numerically superior enemy force." "Yes, sir, but it would also get them off the landing zone, so we can extract safely." It was a bold plan that relied on aggressive movement toward enemy positions rather than defensive tactics. Richardson was clearly calculating the risks, but Maria could see him coming to the same conclusion she had reached. Their current position was untenable. "All right, document. You take Team 2 and bound toward the eastern ridge. I'll coordinate with the bird to provide covering fire." Maria felt her heart rate spike as she realized what she was about to do. Instead of providing medical support from a relatively safe position, she was going to lead a direct assault on prepared enemy positions. It was the kind of aggressive tactical leadership that defined elite special operations units. She gathered Team 2 around her position, shouting over the noise of gunfire and helicopter rotors. "We're going to assault the eastern ridge. The bird will provide covering fire, but we need to move fast and hit them before they can reposition." Collins nodded, his expression serious but confident. "What's the route, Doc?" Maria pointed toward a series of boulders that would provide concealment during their movement toward the ridge. "We bound from cover to cover, using those rocks. When we get within grenade range, we suppress with automatic fire and finish with frags." It sounded simple when stated as a tactical plan, but Maria knew that executing the maneuver would require perfect timing and coordination. One mistake could result in the entire team being caught in the open under enemy fire. Team 2, move out, she ordered, and began sprinting toward the first boulder. The movement toward the enemy positions was the longest 100 meters of Maria's life. Enemy fire intensified as they closed the distance, with bullets snapping through the air around them and impacting on the rocks they used for cover. The helicopter's door gun was providing excellent suppressive fire, but Maria knew they only had seconds before the enemy fighters repositioned to engage their new threat. When they reached the final covered position before the assault, Maria could see individual enemy fighters clearly. There were at least 8 of them positioned among the rocks, armed with AK-47s and what appeared to be a light machine gun. They were well-trained fighters who had chosen their positions carefully. Collins, you and Rodriguez take the left side. Patterson, you're with me on the right. When I give the signal, we all throw frags simultaneously. Maria pulled a fragmentation grenade from her vest, her hands moving through the motion she had practiced countless times during training. The weight of the explosive felt significant in her hand. This was the moment where she would transition from being a medical professional who carried weapons for protection to being a combat soldier actively engaging enemy forces with lethal weapons. 3, 2, 1, frags out. For grenades arced through the air toward the enemy positions. Maria pressed herself against the rocks, counting the seconds until detonation. The explosions came almost simultaneously, creating a wall of smoke and debris that obscured the eastern ridge. Move, move, move. Team 2 charged up the slope toward the enemy positions, their rifles ready to engage any surviving fighters. Maria found herself leading the assault, her medical training forgotten as she focused entirely on closing with and destroying the enemy force that threatened her teammates. The assault was over in seconds. The combination of helicopter fire support, accurate grenade placement, and aggressive movement had overwhelmed the enemy fighters before they could mount effective resistance. Maria found herself standing among the enemy positions, breathing hard and checking for survivors while her teammates secure the area. Eastern Ridge secure, she reported over the radio, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. Commander Richardson's response came immediately. Outstanding work, Team 2. RTB to the LZ for extraction. As they moved back toward the helicopter, Maria realized that she had just led a successful assault on enemy positions while under fire. The young hospital corpsman who had started the day checking medical supplies had evolved into a combat leader capable of making life-or-death tactical decisions under the most extreme pressure. But her medical responsibilities weren't finished. As they reached the landing zone, she immediately moved to check on Kim's condition and prepare him for medical evacuation. The fighting was over, but her job as a medic was just beginning. The transformation was complete, but Maria understood that what had happened that day would define the rest of her military career in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The helicopter ride back to the forward operating base passed in a blur of medical activity and exhausted silence. Maria had immediately re-established Kim's foreline and was monitoring his vital signs while the aircraft raced across the Afghan landscape at maximum speed. The extraction had been successful, but Kim's condition was deteriorating despite her field care. "How's he looking, Doc?" The helicopter crew chief shouted over the rotor noise. Maria checked Kim's pulse and blood pressure again. BP's dropping and heart rate's climbing. "He needs surgery as soon as we land." Kim was conscious, but showing clear signs of shock from blood loss and the physical stress of the tactical movement. His face was pale and clammy, and Maria could see he was struggling to maintain focus. The improvised treatment at the landing zone had stabilized his condition, but only surgical intervention could address the internal bleeding she suspected was occurring. Commander Richardson sat across from her, his expression thoughtful as he watched her work. Throughout the flight, Maria was aware of his attention, though she couldn't interpret what he was thinking. The day had fundamentally changed her role within the team, but she wasn't sure what that meant for her future assignments. "Doc," Richardson said during a brief lull in her medical activities. "We need to talk when we get back to base." Maria nodded while adjusting Kim's oxygen mask. "Yes, sir." The conversation would have to wait. Kim's medical condition required her complete attention, and she was already mentally preparing for the handoff to the surgical team at the forward operating base. Her field notes would need to be comprehensive and accurate to ensure continuity of care. As the helicopter approached the base, Maria could see the medical team waiting on the landing pad. The sight of doctors and nurses with proper medical equipment filled her with relief. She had done everything possible under field conditions, but Kim needed surgical care that was beyond her capabilities as a hospital corpsman. The aircraft touched down, and Maria immediately began coordinating the transfer of care to the surgical team. She rattled off Kim's vital signs, medical history, and treatment timeline while helping move him from the helicopter to the waiting stretcher. Entry and exit wounds to the left shoulder and upper chest, she reported to the trauma surgeon. Controlled bleeding with pressure dressings, established 4-line with normal saline, no signs of pneumothorax. BP has been dropping over the past 30 minutes despite fluid resuscitation. The surgical team took over with practiced efficiency, wheeling Kim toward the base hospital while Maria watched from the landing pad. Her part of his care was finished, but she knew she would be checking on his condition until he was evacuated to a larger medical facility. "Hell of a job out there, Doc," Chief Torres said, appearing beside her as the dust from the helicopter settled. "Kim owes you his life." Maria felt a strange mixture of pride and exhaustion. "Just doing my job, Chief." But even as she said the words, Maria knew they weren't entirely true. What she had done that day had gone far beyond her job description as a hospital corpsman. She had served as tactical leader, assault team leader, and medical provider all in the same operation. Commander Richardson approached as the medical team disappeared into the hospital. "Doc, my office in 30 minutes. Get cleaned up first." The order was delivered in Richardson's typical direct style, but Maria detected something different in his tone. There was a formality that suggested this wasn't going to be a routine after-action debriefing. Maria made her way to the temporary quarters she shared with other Navy personnel, her mind racing through the events of the day. Her uniform was dirty and torn from crawling through irrigation ditches and moving across rough terrain. Her medical pack had served as makeshift tactical gear, and her rifle showed signs of the heavy use it had seen during the firefight. As she cleaned her equipment and changed uniforms, Maria tried to process what had happened. She had started the day as a hospital corpsman attached to a special operations unit for medical support. She was ending it as someone who had led tactical movements under fire and directed assault operations against enemy positions. The transformation felt surreal, but she couldn't deny the sense of accomplishment that came with knowing she had performed well under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. The respect she had seen in the eyes of some of America's most elite warriors was something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. 30 minutes later, Maria knocked on the door of Commander Richardson's office. The small building served as both administrative center and tactical operations hub for the Special Operations Detachment, and Maria had only been inside once before for her initial briefing. "Come in, Doc." Richardson's office was spartanly furnished but functional. Maps of the local area covered one wall, and his desk held the communications equipment that kept him connected with higher headquarters. He gestured for Maria to take a seat across from his desk. "First things first," Richardson began. "Outstanding performance today. You saved Kim's life, led tactical movements under fire, and showed leadership abilities that frankly surprised everyone, including me." Maria felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Thank you, sir." However, Richardson continued, "What happened today raises some questions about how we're utilizing your capabilities. You performed duties well beyond your training and rank, and you did them exceptionally well." Maria wasn't sure if she was being praised or criticized. "Sir, I just did what the situation required." Richardson leaned back in his chair, studying her with the analytical expression she had come to recognize. Doc, in my 15 years of special operations, I've seen a lot of people rise to the occasion under fire. What you did today was different. You didn't just rise to the occasion, you exceeded it. He reached into his desk and pulled out a file folder. I've been looking at your record. Hospital Corpsman School, advanced trauma training, attached to infantry units for 2 deployments. Good performance reviews, but nothing that would suggest what I saw today. Maria shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at, sir. What I'm getting at, Doc, is that you have natural tactical instinct that can't be taught. The way you read terrain, made movement decisions under fire, and led experienced special operations personnel, that's not normal for someone with your background. Richardson opened the file and looked at something inside. I'm recommending you for several things. First, a Bronze Star with V device for valor under fire. Second, I'm recommending you for selection to Special Operations Medical Training. Maria felt her heart skip a beat. Special Operations Medical Training was the path to becoming a Special Operations Independent Duty Corpsman, one of the most elite medical positions in the Navy. It would mean months of additional training, but it would also mean permanent assignment to Special Operations units. Sir, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for. Richardson held up his hand. Doc, let me finish. Third, I'm recommending you for weapons training that goes well beyond standard hospital corpsman requirements. What happened today proved you have combat leadership potential that the Navy needs to develop. The implications of what Richardson was suggesting hit Maria like a physical blow. He wasn't just talking about advanced medical training. He was talking about transforming her entire military career trajectory. Sir, can I ask why you're willing to make these recommendations based on one operation? Richardson's expression became serious. Because, Doc, in 15 years of doing this job, I've learned to recognize people who have what it takes to succeed in special operations. It's not about physical strength or marksmanship. It's about the ability to think clearly under pressure and make good decisions when lives are on the line. He closed the file and looked directly at her. You led multiple tactical movements under fire, coordinated helicopter extractions, and directed assault operations against numerically superior enemy forces. You did all of that while providing life-saving medical care to a severely wounded teammate. Maria felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Richardson was offering. Special operations training would be the most challenging military education available, but it would also open doors to assignments and responsibilities she had never imagined possible. What would this training involve, sir? 18 months of the most demanding medical and tactical training the military offers, Richardson replied. Combat medicine, tactical leadership, advanced weapons training, and specialized insertion techniques. If you complete the program, you'll be qualified for direct assignment to SEAL teams, Marine recon units, and other special operations forces. The opportunity was incredible, but Maria also understood the commitment it would require. Special operations personnel deployed frequently and faced dangers that went far beyond conventional military assignments. Sir, I need to ask, do you think I'm ready for something like that? Richardson's answer came without hesitation. Doc, most people spend their entire military careers trying to prove they belong in special operations. You proved it in one afternoon under fire. The confidence in his voice was unmistakable, but Maria still felt the weight of uncertainty. What about resistance from people who don't think women belong in special operations? There will be resistance, Richardson acknowledged, but there will also be people like me who recognize talent when they see it. The military is changing, and we need people who can adapt and excel regardless of traditional expectations. Maria thought about Kim, who was probably in surgery at that moment. She thought about the SEALs who had trusted her leadership when their lives were on the line. She thought about the enemy fighters she had engaged during the assault on the Eastern Ridge. Sir, if I accept this recommendation, what happens next? You complete your current deployment, then report to Coronado for Special Operations Medical Training. It won't be easy. The attrition rate is over 60%. But if you complete the program, You'll be one of the most qualified medical professionals in the military. Richardson leaned forward in his chair. Doc, I'm not going to pressure you into this decision. It has to be something you want, because the training will test every limit you have. Maria realized that everything in her life had led to this moment. Her medical training, her deployment experience, and even her performance that day had prepared her for exactly this opportunity. Sir, I accept your recommendation. Richardson smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him since they met. Outstanding. I'll start the paperwork tomorrow. As Maria left Richardson's office, she felt the weight of a decision that would define the rest of her military career. The young hospital corpsman who had checked her medical kit that morning no longer existed. In her place was someone who had proven herself under fire and earned the respect of some of America's most elite warriors. The transformation had happened in a single day, but Maria understood that it was really just the beginning. Special operations training would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine, but she had already proven to herself that she could rise to any challenge. 6 months later, Hospital Corpsman Second Class Maria Santos reported to Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. The file that preceded her contained Commander Richardson's recommendations, detailed accounts of her performance under fire, and a Bronze Star citation that read, in part, Petty Officer Santos displayed exceptional courage and tactical leadership while under enemy fire, directly contributing to the successful extraction of wounded personnel and the defeat of a numerically superior enemy force. But the most important thing in her file was a simple note in Richardson's handwriting. This sailor has proven she belongs with the best warriors our country has to offer. The note would follow her through special operations training, through selection to a SEAL team, and eventually through a career that would take her to conflicts around the world. But it all started on a dusty Afghan hillside when a hospital corpsman named Maria Santos learned that she was capable of far more than anyone, including herself, had ever imagined. Years later, when young military personnel asked her about breaking barriers and proving herself in male-dominated fields, Maria would always give them the same advice. Don't wait for permission to be exceptional. When a moment comes to step up, step up. The only person who can define your limitations is you. The weapon she learned to master, the operation she would lead, and the lives she would save all flowed from that single moment when Commander Richardson looked at a hospital corpsman and saw a warrior. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not against external enemies, but against the limitations we place on ourselves. Maria Santos won that battle on a day when she stopped being just a medic and became exactly who she was meant to be,